Okay, how are you doing?
Hello, everybody. This is Sikowis with Great Plains Action Society. I am the founder of this little small but scrappy organization, and I am honored today because we have decided to do a whole forum on the NoDAPL movement in Iowa so that we can revisit the things that many brave, courageous people did in the state to stop this atrocity from running, diagonally from one corner to the other, from being here. And, we just really want to uplift and celebrate the work that people did, from Indigenous folks, at the front lines, on the ground, in their territories, to, environmental activists, like landowners, both like farmers and just landowners in even like near urban settings, and to all the people that have been doing this work since 2014 essentially. And I would like to start off by speaking with Carolyn Raffensperger, who is a real mentor to me and has been to many folks across the Midwest, not just in the Dakota Access Pipeline fight, but also for Line 3 and for the KXL. And so I'm going to add you here, Carolyn. Hello. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. It would be so great to hear you talk about how you got involved with the Dakota Access Pipeline initially through Iowa and your thoughts, moving forward on this pipeline.
So I heard about it in 2014 and joined a remarkable team of people that had heard about the pipeline through Wally Taylor. Wally Taylor heard from a reporter at the Des Moines Register about the pipeline coming through because his cousin had been approached by some of the landmen who were trying to buy an easement from his cousin. And so Wally gathered a group of people together, including graduate students at Iowa State, landowners, Sierra Club members, all sorts of wonderful folks. And I was instantly attracted to the group for a lot of reasons. One of the things that I think we learned from Dakota Access and the struggle that we began in Iowa in 2014. In 2014, it didn't even have a name. It wasn't named Dakota Access. We just called it the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition. And what we formed was community. We formed a community with Indigenous people, with graduate students, with landowners. And it was not just Iowa, although Iowa was at the beginning of the whole struggle. And I think back on that time and think that it was the best of a generation of people. And certainly we had multiple generations. I'm quite a bit older than you are, and we had all ages involved. But for this generation to be good ancestors to those to come. And we were not successful in stopping that pipeline, but we pledged our commitment to the water. We committed our love and our care to that water together. We stood together for future generations of all beings. And, it was quite a remarkable time. I pledged the rest of my life and career to water, in part because of that struggle. And so later we joined forces with people in North Dakota and South Dakota because that horrible pipeline crosses North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and into Illinois. And we made common cause and united in that struggle. And so a number of Indigenous people came down to help train us. Joy Braun from Cheyenne River came down to teach us about nonviolent direct action. And Dallas Goldtooth, another wonderful friend of ours, was deeply involved in trying to harmonize all the work that we were doing before the permitting authorities in all of the states. And those relationships go on. And so if I was going to tell future generations anything, it's that we did our best and we will not give up. We are standing with you. We want you to have a healthy world. We want you to have a world where the white pelicans that graced our resistance and our protests, and that they would fly overhead, and they were either on their way or to North Dakota or on their way back where they nest. And we pledge our support to you, future generations, to have a healthy and beautiful world. We are continuing in monitoring the pipeline because government is not doing its job. The role of government is to support well-being. And what they did is they supported money. They supported something that we can't eat. They supported something that will poison the water with that oil. And we stand in opposition to that, but we stand for health and well-being. We stand for justice. We stand for sanity. And that is what I want to leave future generations with, the message that that community that formed together stood for you together, stood together, that so that this world would not be marked by that horrible pipeline. And we are not giving up. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. I'm doing this solo today. Usually meets me and Trish together, but so here I am. But yeah, it's always great to hear you speak because not only do you always provide, that legal perspective, which is so important, but the very inspiring message, which I think we always have to keep in mind. So thank you. I would like to, Wally Taylor was our next guest, but I'm quickly going to just kind of pop Ronnie in here quickly because he has to get to class. And we want to hear from Ronnie, Ronnie James, who also has done a lot of work here in Iowa to try to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And also at Standing Rock, he did a significant effort to get resources up there. Ronnie, hi. My collective member and friend and brother. Please tell us about your thoughts on the Dakota Access Pipeline in Iowa.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. And around 2016, I started getting really concerned about the pipeline. I come from a farming family, and not only was there environmental concerns, but even just the rights to farmers. It's really concerning to me. With the land being taken and potentially destroyed. So at the time I owned a small comic shop, so I wasn't able to get my boots on the ground. I was trying to keep the shop open, but I started taking supply donations and money donations to send first to Standing Rock, and then as I started getting to know more of the people in Iowa doing work, to them also. Ended up being like the people of Des Moines is where the shop was, really showed up. I didn't expect that much support. Many hours a week were spent arranging for everything to get to where it needed to go. Through that's actually how I met Sikowis, through Little Creek Camp. And we just kind of started working together on all sorts of things from there.
We did, and we're still working on things like this because we do know that there's talk of doubling the capacity of the whale through this pipeline, which would be like really scary considering I think that right now there's about 1,400 pounds per square inch, like pushing on that. And so I don't know how that works. And I just know there'd be more chemicals involved to make it more liquefied, which is scary as well because those chemicals are extremely carcinogenic. But thank you so much, Ronnie. I appreciate you giving us your perspective and thank you for the sacrifice you made, and like you did a lot. So I would like to say hello to Wally Taylor. Hello, Wally.
Hi. Sorry, I've had the wrong link.
Oh, I know. We had a little, that's why we started a couple minutes late, everybody. We had an issue with the link. I don't know why this happened. The one day when I'm doing this by myself without my partner, Trish. But Wally, it's such an honor to have you here because you did work, legally in Iowa to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline for years. And so having your perspective is really important. So yeah, please tell us about yourself and the work you've been doing.
Okay. Well, I'm an attorney in Cedar Rapids.
Oh.
As Carolyn mentioned to you, I got involved initially in 2014 when a reporter called me and asked if I knew about this pipeline project to carry oil from North Dakota to the refineries on the Gulf of Mexico. And I said, no, but it sounds like a bad idea. And so we formed the coalition that Carolyn had described to you. And legally, what Dakota Access had to do at that time, back in 2014, 2015, was to get a permit from the Iowa Utilities Board, which is the state agency that has the authority to determine whether or not Dakota Access would get a permit to build and operate their pipeline. The Utilities Board had a full hearing. Gosh, it took a couple of weeks, I think, at least. And we argued that the pipeline did not satisfy the requirement as bringing a benefit to the people. They call it public convenience and necessity, because it would put at risk all of the rivers and streams that the pipeline would cross from the Big Sioux River in northwest Iowa all the way through the Raccoon, the Des Moines, Skunk, down to the Mississippi River. And what Dakota Access did was they went right through some of those rivers, the smaller ones. The bigger ones, they put the pipe underneath the river. But there have been numerous spills, sometimes costing millions or even billions of dollars to clean up by pipelines that have gone through or under rivers. But the Utilities Board didn't pay attention to that. They didn't pay attention to the impacts on climate change. I had two very, very excellent experts, James Hansen, who you may have heard of, who brought the issue of climate change to national attention by testifying to Congress back in the 1980s. And we still haven't heeded his warning. And also a professor at Iowa State who's done a lot of climate work, particularly as it affects agriculture here in Iowa. Gene Techley is his name. But the Utilities Board paid no attention to that. All they based their decision on to grant the permit was that it would provide some temporary jobs to the laborers who would be building the pipeline, and the supposition that pipelines were safer than the railroad trains to carry the oil. But we had some really good testimony that that wasn't the case, that pipelines aren't safer when you figure the volumes and the number of trips. So the Utility Board's decision was appealed to an Iowa district court, which ruled against us. The judge just deferred to the Utilities Board, saying, well, they're the experts, they know more than I do, so I'll just go along with what they've done. Then we appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court, which did essentially the same thing and said, yeah, we'll defer to the Utilities Board. but what the courts didn't understand is that we were talking about issues that the Utilities Board ignored. The environmental issues, the land use issues, the landowners whose property was being severely damaged by this pipeline, the climate change issue, the water issue. The Utilities Board took the attitude, well, the Department of Natural Resources will take care of the environmental issues, but the Corps of Engineers will take care of the water issues. But the fact is that those two agencies have very, very limited jurisdiction, plus no real will to do anything. And so that was an empty reliance on the so-called environmental agencies. Then more recently, as Christine indicated, in the last year or so, Dakota Access proposed to double the volume of oil on the pipeline to about 1.1 million gallons or barrels per day. And a barrel is 42 point some gallons. So we objected to that and said that Dakota Access needed to get an amended permit. And amazingly enough, the Utilities Board suggests you need to get an amended permit. So then we thought, well, we're going to get a hearing, we're going to have evidence, we're going to be able to stop this perhaps. But then on a motion from Dakota Access, the board waived the requirement for a hearing and said that they can have their amended permit, and that was the end of that. We did not appeal that because we felt we'd get the same result we got before. You know, the old saying is, if you do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that's insanity. So we didn't. So in Iowa, we really don't have much left that we can do unless Dakota Access tries something else. What the situation is now is that there is still an issue in North Dakota because Dakota Access has gone under Lake Oahe, which is a reservoir behind the Oahe Dam on the Missouri River. And that's a Corps of Engineers project. So the Dakota Access needs a permit from the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers was going to grant that, but a federal court said, well, first you have to have environmental impact statement. I might mention that we didn't have an environmental impact statement in Iowa before the Utilities Board because these were all state issues, and Iowa does not have an environmental policy act that requires an environmental impact statement. So that's something our legislature should do, which I'll get to in a minute. Now that we have a different administration in Washington, the Trump administration, of course, let the pipeline go ahead, but we're hoping that the new administration will put a stop to it and tell the Corps of Engineers not to grant the permit. That would stop any oil from flowing. The pipe is already there, the oil has been flowing, but if the effort is successful with regard to Lake Oahe, then the oil will stop flowing. I think what the lesson we need to take away from all of this is that we as citizens need to get involved politically. The governor appoints the utility board members. The governor appoints the director of the Department of Natural Resources. The legislature could change the law to make it more effective in stopping a project like this. So as difficult as it might seem, as hopeless as it might seem, we really need to get out there and take part in the political process. Let our views be known. Don't be bashful. Don't think there's nothing we can do. We have to really get involved in the political process and elect leaders and office holders who will protect the environment and protect our land and our water and our way of life, our climate for future generations. I think that's about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you've done and continue to do, because I know we still have work ahead of us, don't we?
Well, there's always work ahead of us.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there'll be more pipelines. Hopefully we can get away from oil. We're certainly working at it, but it's we're fighting a very powerful special interest in trying to do that.
Well, the good thing, I mean, it's hard to see good coming out of this, but I do see a massive show of solidarity in this state. And I think that moving forward, you know, when bad things come in here, we're going to be like much stronger for it. So we'll just keep doing what we can. And thank you so much for your time, Wally.
As Carolyn said, this is the coalition we had is one of the best coalitions I've ever seen in Iowa. And I hope we can bottle whatever it was we used to get those people together and use it again.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Our next guest is Donnielle Wanatee. And Donnielle's the homie. I mean, and she's my sister. And we, you know, have been fighting this pipeline together for a while, but she started way back in the day. And I'm really glad to have her here today to speak about like her perspective on this as a Meskwaki person, as somebody that, you know, was fighting this back in, I think already 2014, and one of the people that ran initially with the youth. So hello, Donnielle. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, thank you for having me. So in 2013, I became aware of this pipeline because of the water issue. I started being concerned with water quality because I started having stomach issues. So that made me research what was in the water, being that I'm allergic to some antibiotics. So when I started going down that rabbit hole and researching what was in the water, I came across this pipeline that was going to be cutting across the state of Iowa and ultimately use an eminent domain for private gain, which takes land away from private landowners and uses it for a public utility company. But the thing was that the way the Energy Transfer Partners, the oil company that was transporting this oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, the way they were going about it was just wrong. Like us United States citizens, we can't do stuff like that. We can't drive a car without a license. We can't like own a gun without a permit and stuff like that. So this pipeline, they could come through here. And I realized the oil wasn't stopping off anywhere in the state of Iowa. It wasn't going into no cars in Iowa. And it just seemed to be that they were trying to, Energy Transfer Partners was trying to fast track it through. And that made me very concerned because it was a slippery slope that is coming for all Americans if we're not aware of what's going on. And these utility companies, they claim they're for public use, but most of them are for private gain. And if you can see what happened down in Texas when their electricity went out, and if you can see during the ratio, you know, how the difference was about those two, the rural electric co-ops and the private electric companies, everything ties in together. And so when the Standing Rock youth and the tribes up there reached out to people and wanted to unite, they wanted to know if there was somebody down here in Iowa who was fighting, who was Native American. And so they put me in touch with them, and that's how I got connected. And when the youth ran from, had 2 youth runs up there in South Dakota from Wakpala to, I forgot where the other one town was. And then they ran from Wakpala to Omaha and to hand over a petition to the Army Corps of Engineers. And they realized that maybe that wasn't getting enough attention for them. So they wanted their voice to be louder and they wanted it to be heard. So at first it started out as a joke. Shall we run to Washington, D.C.? You know, joked about it. And they were joking about it, the youth were. So I said, go ahead, you know, go. You guys could do it. So then they decided to do it. And they ran here to Iowa, to the Meskwaki settlement. They ran from the power grounds up to the center. The whole community here came out, supported them. It was in July. It was hot. It was humid. It was muggy. And they ran here. And that was one of their first experiences going east of the Mississippi River. But they've encountered a lot of things. And what I've seen in the difference from Iowa and other states is that Iowa has one federally recognized tribe in the state of Iowa, but yet we are still involved in this fight against DAPL and the fight for water. And in the state of Iowa, we have come together to bring together certain organizations to form a coalition against this pipeline, which, yes, it is a good thing. I wish more states and more communities would do this, would bring the people together, because we all breathe water in our mother's womb before we breathe air on earth. And that's how important water is to everybody. And that's what I'm still fighting. There's a way we can unite this. When we did run, we ran through Indianapolis, the Black community, the lower impoverished communities. And we started having these conversations about when this country, the water starts being marketed and they start hoarding it for certain people. It's the poor people, which is usually the Black and brown people, that are going to be needing the water the most. We look at Flint, Michigan. It's almost 7 years out, and they still haven't gotten free and clutch water. The Navajo reservation still doesn't have plumbing and water to the reservations. So that's something we all have to be aware of. And in Iowa, if we can match this, the coalitions and how we came together to try and fight this pipeline on all fronts, and all the other states kind of learn from us what we did, I believe we can actually stop these pipelines together. In Washington, D.C., where we ran in 2.8 miles on April 1st, we also did an action where we put tripods on the intersection right in front of the White House by the Black Lives Matter intersection plaza. And so I know we are capable of mobilizing. I know we are capable of uniting. We just need to keep having these conversations and start remembering that a rising tide raises all ships, and we're all in this together, every single one of us. And I'm an Iowan, but I'm also Meskwaki, and I will fight for my Iowa. And so I hope you can join us and keep this front going and support any cause, or even our cause and what we're doing, because I won't give up until these pipelines are stopped. Because eventually I am going to be an elder and I'm going to need fresh, clean water, and I'm getting tired. So I'm trying to teach the youth and bring them up and let them know what I've been learning. And just a little advice, start passing your knowledge on to a younger person. We don't know what's going to happen. Look, the coronavirus, somebody might cross the line, and all of a sudden we're dead when we're driving home or something. And just pass your knowledge along. Don't let it stay in your head. That's how we build this movement and keep going forward. And I trust the youth that are coming up, and let's help them. Thank you.
Thank you, Donnielle. I really appreciate your words. I'm going to have a little talk with the interpreters right now. Hello. I have a question. We didn't actually work out how we were going to be going back and forth. So do you want to just give me a signal, and then I can add, I can take one of you off and put one of you on?
Or we can go camera off ourselves if you'd like as we switch.
That would be great. I would appreciate that. That's less work for me. That would be so great, because you guys can turn your camera on and off, I believe. So I will have you both on here at the same time. All right, everybody.
Are you ready?
All right, I'm going to bring on our next guest. And this person is important to me, Mark Edwards. I've learned so much from Mark over the years, just stuff that has really helped put me on a path that has been really empowering, particularly concerning the issues we have here in Iowa with Big Ag and CAFOs and all of that. And that's all related, really, because it's corporate America doing their thing, practicing colonial farming, basically capitalism. And that's what the Dakota Access Pipeline is really about. So, Mark, I think you probably have to unmute yourself.
Hey,
Yes,
well,
hi. Thank you for being here.
I know it's so fun to see all these people that I've grown to love come to really appreciate, keep my spirits going. And so I guess that's my history goes back. I'm a little bit older, so it goes back to I went out to the Black Hills Survival Gathering in 1980. And at that point, it was a very similar thing to Standing Rock. They were talking about uranium mining, women, Red Nation. There was just so much coming at me at that age. It was just unbelievable. And here it is, this many years later, and we're still kind of fighting the same things. Mm-hmm. And yet the thing that's brought me along through all this is the people I've met. And it's kind of been a positive thing in some ways, because I've met these wonderful people from all different backgrounds and all different ways of becoming involved, and to see it going to the young people now. Christine, I just admire so much how much the young people are being brought into this, and so I kind of keep trying to step back. But I tell you, for spirit-wise, this has just been so exciting, because I kind of would go up and down feeling like, oh, this is not getting any better. Another issue would come along, and here came the pipeline. And so out of that, by this point, I'd really dug in locally where I live, and I really tied to the river. I moved to the river, and I still live on that river. And in that process, when I came back from the Black Hills Survival Gathering, I began working for the Department of Natural Resources. And through that career development, I ended up working with the Corps of Engineers and all these bureaucracies. And in that process, you get pretty defeated. You see how these bureaucracies are not working, and it becomes very depressing. And I remember writing a letter to the editor trying to say, to move a trail in a state park or to put in a trail somewhere, I had to go through more scrutiny than this pipeline did. And it was just phenomenal to me how bad all these different bureaucracies are working, as Wally mentioned, the IUB. And as you work your way through, your spirit keeps getting hammered and hammered and hammered. But then each time I'm around someone like you and a lot of the people on this, I just soar again, because you realize this has been going on for hundreds of years, and it's not going to quit. And so, it's these relationships to the river, to these people, that really grow deeper and deeper through this process. And I feel fortunate to have that. Mm-hmm. And so, I tried to use my knowledge of these bureaucracies and how they work, testifying and all this stuff, trying to drag the DNR in and organize the flotilla so that we could get more people on the river. And we had wonderful turnouts for those kind of things. And you realize that people really don't even realize where they live. A lot of people, and that's where my education came with, was, as you mentioned, Christine, learning about where I live in Iowa and realizing, we're the most biologically altered state in North America. 2/3 of our 36 million acres has only 2 species on it, corn and soybeans. We're killing the best soil in the world, and that soil is really just the carcass from the prairie ecosystem that was here previously, that we've gotten rid of 99.9% of it in Iowa. So you can just kind of, really dig yourself in a hole of depression, but at the same time, balancing out as this realization grows that this pipeline is just another tentacle of this horrible process of eating up the world. And so I feel really kind of buoyant and happy to be part of this, and I can't thank the people that have been involved enough, because it's been quite a community. I feel very fortunate to have that community to be part of.
Well, we've been learning a lot from each other.
Yes, we have very much. Can
you tell us about the flotilla? I forgot about that, to be honest. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was a really cool thing. That was the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition. I just want to say this really quickly, everybody. So in Iowa, people were calling it the Bakken Pipeline back in the day. And so then DAPL became popular. And then, but it was the same thing. It's the same pipeline coming from the same Bakken pipeline, Bakken oil fields. So, can you tell us about the flotilla?
Well, I moved over by that river in a cabin in 1970. And luckily, the woman I'm in love with, she comes from that Pilot Mountain area, right where that pipeline crossed. So again, we got the community center. We started organizing and having meetings, and nonviolence training. Joy Braun, we went to that in Des Moines. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And so I'm a paddler. I like spending time on that river. So we said, well, let's do a flotilla. And I can't remember how many boats we had, but we rented 30, 40 boats or something like that. And it was a great turnout. The ironic part there again was it took me longer to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers to have a group float on that river. It took months of negotiating with that and insurance. And I mean, it was this horrible process.
And like DAPL doesn't even have insurance.
Yeah. I mean, you could go on. The ironies of all this has been, but that's how we learn about the world and how it really, we're told a story, but that isn't the real story. The real story is quite different. And the older you get, the more you realize, that fable that we're fed is really killing the world. And so, like I said, to me, community and tied to place and these ties to these other beings who I realize are my job came from there. Everything came from that land. That land gave me a whole life, and I'm lucky and so lucky to have that. And that flotilla was so inspiring because a lot of people had never been in a boat on the river before. Well, let's see. We set up a camp. Actually, Donnielle came over and we set up a camp up where we were going to put in. And so we had a base camp where people could come and camp. And then we would get in the boats. We loaded all up people in the boats. We had experienced people. We had first aid people. We had all kinds of people. Kids, lots of kids. That was the other exciting part about it, that had never been in a boat, never been on the river. And people, didn't know how important that river is. That river is like our Missouri River. It's the river between the Missouri and the Mississippi, and it drains 2/3 of Iowa. And so it's an extremely important river. And on a personal level, it came all the way down to, I realized the people in Boone didn't realize their water came from that river. So if that pipeline leaked, there wasn't going to be any water. And, when people can't make the connection between where you get your water and that river, it was really sad. So that flotilla was a big deal. It really made a lot of inroads with people. And I know some of the people are still now paddlers. They've got their own boats and they go out there and they spend time on that river. And the more you listen to that river, the more you know what to do. It's a good guide.
Absolutely. And your work has also inspired, your knowledge has inspired, like some of us to, continue in that vein, with the zine I've written, for instance, on Big Ag, like a lot of that is learning from you, and like Nebraska Stand and like other, organizations with younger people, we've been following in step to try to like make sure that we keep doing that, and then also providing our Indigenous perspective.
Yes, which is very important. That long range understanding of where you live gets you to step out of your little ego and realize you're part of a much larger community, and a community that's gone on for a long, long time. Absolutely. Hard to comprehend.
Yeah,
but
right?
I'm not from Iowa originally, and I love Iowa because there is kind of this basic thing going on here of really confrontation between two different worldviews. And if we don't get it settled in Iowa, which is the most biologically altered place, well, you're not going to settle it anywhere else. So I think this face-off with ag and oil and just using this however we want for whatever human purposes is catching up with us. And I think more and more people are realizing that. And you guys are working so hard to share that story. I just thank you for letting me be part of this. It's really...
Well, we're grateful for you too.
Okay.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
Sure. Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Our next guest, I'm not even going to introduce her because, like, British.
Hi. Can you hear me?
She's usually on here with me.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, oh, it's always the microphone. So
I'm going to let you introduce yourself and talk about your time fighting the pipeline in Iowa and at Standing Rock.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So Hijikishna Hinikarigiwina. My name is Trisha Ettringer, and I'm from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. I am Eagle Clan, And my fight with the Dakota Access Pipeline started, I would say, in September. And I was always watching the news to see the latest updates on what was going on. And it wasn't until I started seeing more resistance, and it was something that was a personal connection to me, to see, natives standing up for the land and for the water and for Indigenous rights. So I ended up going up there because I just felt this extreme pull to go there up at Standing Rock, to be a part of that, to kind of lend a helping hand if needed. Prior to that, I had just found out that I was 2 months pregnant. So I wasn't trying to do too much, but on the day of the dog attacks, we were initially supposed to be praying, and then this is on Labor Day weekend, and Dakota Access Pipeline workers were out there working, and it was very upsetting, especially with the injunction that was filed, I think the previous, Thursday, that they weren't even supposed to be out there to begin with. So it was kind of just, we marched up to where the workers were working, and, I felt like everybody was just tired of seeing that happen. And so we basically just stood together. We were able to collectively, as natives, we were able to pretty much just stop work for that whole day. And then right after that, I feel like a lot of resistance, hostility was brought upon the natives who were standing up for what they, it's the water, the land, just things that are, how do I say it? Things that are just, basic human rights. We have a right to clean water. We have a right to breathe clean air, to have an environment that is clean. So after that weekend, I had came back, and I was going to University of Northern Iowa, and I happened to, go to the Multicultural Center and, kind of just share my story, like, of what happened. As I'm explaining it to somebody in the Multicultural Center, they're scrolling down and seeing, like, oh my gosh, like, what happened? And, it was kind of surreal to see that, to come right from that, and then to share that, my personal account of what happened that day. From there on, I've did a lot of outreach on the campus, to basically raise the awareness of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I worked with peer, so basically it was just students and faculty that were a part of UNI's student body, and they worked to basically promote cleaner energy, cleaner environment. And I was able to make a lot of connections. I kind of traveled to different places within Iowa to share my story, and then also to raise the awareness. I feel like, if you didn't have an active part as to being up at Standing Rock, that it's just as important to, do what you can locally to raise the awareness and to fight, divest, to basically just, raise the awareness and get the education out about how these pipelines are so horrendous to anybody. It's no secret that, that they did a lot of illegal construction. So that was just kind of my personal account of what I was a part of. And yeah, I think, I don't know if Christine, I met Christine during this work too as well. So that's how we kind of initially, I knew her in 2017 for MMIW. We met at a symposium, but I didn't know all this time, like, she was here in the state of Iowa, and I could have easily just plugged in here to Little Creek Camp, but eventually our paths crossed, and that's how we came to know each other. And that's kind of like I feel like it's just a kind of a connection that we do share. I feel like a lot of like Standing Rock, a lot of people made the connection and they met a lot of amazing people. It's just something that everyone can connect to and have a personal, personal story about how Standing Rock, basically, opened the world's eyes to this illegal, corporate scheme, basically.
Absolutely. And here we are.
Here we are.
Now. And after, actually, we met because of our next guest, Faith Spotted Eagle, because we went up to Mission, South Dakota, to help with an MMIW event.
Yes.
And we did the what did we do?
We did the MMIW. It was like
media,
a symposium.
media. The word media
Yes,
left
we
my
did
mind.
media. Yes, I feel like we're
I
always
was doing
media.
something. So yes, we did the media up there. And I'm going to bring Faith on now. And thank you so much, Trish, for being a guest tonight while I do all the hard work. I'm just kidding. All right. I'm going to bring Trish on now. Faith on stage. And I'm going to ask Faith to turn on your mic and yes, there you are. Hi. It's so nice to see you, Faith. I'm really happy to have you here today, in particular because of some work you did in Iowa concerning a sacred site. And I believe that was in Lyon County. And I was hoping that you might want to talk about that.
I have to make a correction on there. I was involved in it mostly by phone, and I was involved through, the way we organized through Facebook and emails and all of that, and then responses from my tribe, because the thing that really KXL has showed us before Standing Rock came along was the power of grassroots. We're working in concert with leadership and other grassroots. And so a lot of it, if we weren't able to be on site, we could send other people, or we could strategize later. And that was my role in regard to the site in Iowa. But I was very much involved in the conversations with, I believe her name was Sarah, the person that was the TIPO, I believe, for Flandreau.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been so many, like the previous speaker was saying, all of it kind of runs together with all of our organizing sometimes. And it's good to put it in order. But we were very much aware of it, and so we made statements. And part of the battle from the tribal representation level is that while people are out there getting arrested, or people are not getting arrested and doing other things, we're in the background at the same time doing those essential communications, trying to make it nation to nation. So there would always be some kind of response that we would have to make to the DOI or the ACOE, or all those acronyms. So while we're busily trying to stay alive and protect the land and water, we have to make these silly responses, which are just totally unheard. And so there were numerous hearings, responses. You have 15 days, you have 30 days. So that was my other role during that time, was to kind of like having all these screens up, like there's 10 screens there. I got to keep an eye on the conversations with the ACOA, with the ACHP, all of this stuff that's going on. And so when you're in that tribal leadership loop, you have to pay attention to those. You can't just go out and demonstrate and, do those demonstrations were really, really important. But that really hard one behind the scenes, it's not a very pleasant one, because it's a pseudo nation to nation. It's not real. It's just a performance that we have to do. And thank goodness, with the Biden administration coming in, perhaps there will be some reform, some restructuring of those very violent systems that would cause us to constantly react to everything. It was like a giant violent chess game constantly. And so I think a lot of people didn't have the idea that all of this was going on behind the stage, that we'd always be having a meeting to make sure there was no actual consultation happening, to make sure that nobody agreed with the core. And it was really, it was almost like you had to be ninja to keep all of that together. So I just wanted to start out by saying that, because example after an example, in the latest one, and I'll say this one, I don't know how much time I have, Christine, but some of this is such a sham, because you have to go through all these procedures as a tribal representative, and it's all for nothing. And they're saying, hurry, hurry, you only have this timeline. And I'll give you an example. In the twilight of the KXL, before the death of the KXL, and I'm going to say death, we had to comment on the state of Montana on the Missouri River. And so a lot of the tribes from Montana and us were on the call of the water permit hearing. Lots and lots of people. So anyway, we get, about a week later, we get a comment from the water permit hearing. And you know what the answer was? This is crazy. After all this stress of writing these beautiful concept papers that were real defense stands, they said, oh, we had too many people in the public hearing and there were too many comments to review, so we just granted the permit. What kind of rationale is that? I would love to have the Biden administration examine that. I mean, there's no rationale behind that. After we go to this trouble of hours of documenting why this water permit should not be submitted, and then they say, sorry, there was too many people, we couldn't view them all, so we can't comment, and they gave them the permit. It doesn't make any sense. So that's just an example of the stuff that we have to do behind the scenes. I'm on a Zoom call. But as far as the organizing part, I'm not sure, kind of guide me, Christine. I just came from the grandchildren, so Grandma, Kushi is still ringing in my head. I can't hear you. Am I off? Okay.
That's my fault.
Okay.
I had to definitely switch computers because my computer crashed, so I had to do that while you were speaking.
Okay.
So the one thing, I know, right? I think the one thing that we could learn from you is how these sacred sites are constantly being desecrated, and how that sacred sites don't belong just in Indian country, right? Like how there's sacred sites in Iowa that were just plowed through, and you were like part of that, that group of people trying to stop that particular site in Lyon County from being destroyed, basically.
Yes. I remember distinctly one night working on a paper to submit objecting to that, because what they did in that situation, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but they went under the site. Are you aware of that, Christine? You know, they made efforts to go around it, but in the areas that they couldn't, they went under it. And so what we did in response, and this has happened to other sites, in our comments, we quoted Dekshi, Uncle Vine Deloria, and they asked him, in sites like that or sacred areas, how far does it go? And he said, all of them go to the center of the earth.
I remember you telling me that once, actually.
Yes.
And thank you for bringing it up here.
Yes, that's a perfect demonstration of how sacred those sites are. They don't stop 60 feet or 100, they call it an ape area of potential effect. What a name, an ape. Maybe that's their ancestor or something. But anyway, the area of potential effect usually is like 50 feet, 100 feet, 150. So in their linear mind, they think the sacredness stops right there. And it is so ridiculous to think in those terms. But I think Uncle Vine answered it, just took care of that by saying it goes to the center of the earth.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And I'm sorry I couldn't get your PowerPoint on, but apparently I just don't have enough hands.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Because I'm trying to do this here, but next time I would love to hear more about KXL, and I would love to do something like this, actually, like what we're doing right now, about KXL as well. All the work that people do.
In regard to DAPL, I think it's really important for your listeners to realize that some of what happened at DAPL, the prelude was KXL, because we had been working on KXL for a long time before DAPL came along. And so a lot of the skills, the alliances that were in place, were already in the process of working together. And so when Standing Rock came up, before they had the blessing on April 1st, a couple came down, and I won't say their name because I don't have their permission, but they came down and they said that Cannonball community and others had made the decision to go ahead with the spirit camp. And so they came down and they asked for my blessings, my prayers, because I had worked in the KXL, and they wanted to get an idea of what to expect and what are things to worry about. And so they brought tobacco, and I remember it was like 12 o'clock at night when they arrived, way late at night, and it was dark out, and I visited with them and I prayed with them, and I said I would be there, and they came all the way down to invite me up to be there on April 1st when they set up the first teepee and they set the fire. And so there was a link between that. It wasn't just chop. Now we go from KXL to DAPL. It was almost like a progression, a crescendo of going on, and also a crescendo of prayers, thousands of prayers that were continuing and have been continuing, because if you even look at the McGirt decision in Oklahoma, which revitalizes the Indian Territory, there was a treaty tree that is still in existence in Oklahoma where they laid the prayers in the 1800s. Can you imagine those prayers have been sitting there since the 1800s? And now, just within the last 2 years, those prayers came to fruition, and that land was returned to their land. Can you imagine that? That just gives me chills. I mean, those are almost, oh my gosh, how long ago those prayers have been traveling.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us today, Faith. Thank you so much for being with us today. As always, it's an honor to have you, and I'm so glad you were able to make it.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Our next guest is Alex Cohen, one of the founders of Mississippi Stand. And man, Mississippi Stand threw down really hard in Iowa, all the way from the Mississippi River to the Des Moines River, up at Standing Rock. And I'm so excited to hear you talk, and it's nice to see you again. And please introduce yourself and tell us about Mississippi Stand.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it was also really good to see so many people on this call I haven't seen in so long. But it was kind of I was in Philadelphia at the DNC protesting outside of the DNC, different mass mobilizations there, and I had heard that there was indigenous youth running from Standing Rock to Washington, D.C., and that was coming up. And I thought I better go home first and get my stuff together and maybe head up there. And so home for me is St. Louis. But when I was home in St. Louis, I actually heard a radio interview with Jessica Resnick, who I did not know at the time, but I heard, her on the radio saying she's, pretty much by herself in a ditch next to the Mississippi River, fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline and asking people to join her. So I thought maybe I should head up to Iowa because it sounded like she needed, a lot of support and was there kind of by herself. And so that was actually my first time really going up to Iowa, going to Keokuk and going to Lee County and meeting Jessica. And I went thinking I would stay the weekend, and I ended up basically moving to Iowa for 6 months to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so what was really cool, I think, about Mississippi Stand is it was started from a direct action by one person, by Jessica, who showed up and found the access road and barricaded the entryway to where they were boring underneath the Mississippi River, where the pipeline would cross from Iowa and then enter Illinois. And, she blocked the road, got arrested, got out 24 hours later. Then she did it again, got arrested, got out 24 hours later. And then she asked the sheriff, okay, where can I be without being arrested? And he pointed to the ditch. And that was when I heard a radio interview asking for people to come join her. And it was really cool. By the time I got there, all of the work that she had done in the Des Moines Catholic worker community in Lee County, just like organizing with the local people of that town and centering their voices and having them in all of the meetings. And I'm just like, every time I reflect back on this, I'm really grateful to the people of Lee County, Iowa and Keokuk who fought long before I got there in their town, DAPL on all ends, and slowly were, doing civil disobedience and were walking onto construction sites and shutting down work. And it's just really cool to think about. And I'm a city kid, so like going up to rural Iowa and just like working alongside these people was really awesome for me. And another cool thing is I think DAPL tried to fight back. See, they were drilling underneath the Mississippi in fall, and the drill pad was really accessible for people to do civil disobedience and lock down to machinery and do direct action. And so they slowly put up more fences as direct actions continued. And every time they put up a new fence, more people came. Like the Raging Grannies came, I remember, and one of the Raging Grannies was scaling over one of the fences that Dakota Access put up to still get on the site and shut down construction. And there was just this intergenerational resistance that was showing up to protect the Mississippi River. And it also felt really important because up north and Standing Rock, they were protecting the Missouri, and we were protecting the Mississippi down in Iowa. And so both of these major waterways that supply drinking water to so many people were being very, much protected with big resistance. And as they built the fences, people started noticing that you could lock down to their moving trucks, and you could barricade where they dump the sludge at different points in Iowa. To kind of throw a monkey wrench into the machine. Unfortunately, we watched them finish boring underneath the Mississippi River, I think by November, maybe even before that, in October. And at that point, we kind of thought, I guess it was time to go to Standing Rock. But luckily, word was coming in that they were still drilling under rivers across the whole state of Iowa. And so we started in the southeast corner. And as you said, Christine, we literally worked our way backwards up the entire route of the pipeline, all the way up to the northeast counter. And another big pivotal stand, and it was good to see Mark on this call, was the Boone County resistance and where they were drilling underneath the Des Moines River, and really kind of converging there. And so we started at the Mississippi and ended with a direct action campaign at the Boone County location where they were drilling underneath the Des Moines River.
You guys really impressed me. And I was just so proud to see these young people do this work. And yeah, Jessica Resniak, very, impressive, everything she did, and then everything that Mississippi Stand did after that. Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to see you. And Esther's on here, Esther Tweedy. She's saying,
oh, yes, Esther, hello.
Yeah, I wanted Esther or Hugh to be on, but I didn't get word back. But hopefully we can do this again and we can have more people come on and talk, because they did really wonderful work down there as well.
Yes, it was great working with the Tweedies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I am going to actually play the video that shows a lot of the work that Mississippi Stand did. So thank you for being with us, and I, keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks. Let's talk again soon.
For sure. I am going to play a video now that we made last week, actually, in solidarity with what's happening in Washington, D.C., with relatives that went from Standing Rock and Cheyenne River to tell Biden to, now stop Line 3 and the Dakota Access Pipeline. I think they delivered 40,000 petition signatures, physically there. And they also did a really beautiful action with teepee poles and tripods. But yeah, I would like to play a little video we made, a little, I don't know how you would say it, remembrance of the many things that we did here.
I've been fighting against this pipeline for 3 years, almost going on 4 years now. And the reason why I do it is not for me, it's for all of you guys. The pipeline doesn't run through my land, but it runs through my Iowa. And I am an Iowan, and that's what matters to me.
I sure wish I would have talked to you more in Washington, because the fight started in Iowa. It's like they don't care that 30% of the pipeline goes through Iowa. People have been fighting this pipeline in Iowa for almost 3 years. Nobody wants to stop this pipeline in Iowa right now. We still have a small chance here that we can force them to reroute, and that could take 1 to 2 years.
Oh, there's a river called Des Moines. name's Alexander Nichols. I'm walking down to a pole drag machine to a backhoe. It's trying to get a pipe under the river.
I need everybody to leave, please.
We're good. No, read the letter and then we'll leave.
No, then I'm.
We are
I'm
water
going to ask you to
protectors, encouraging people to leave banks like U.S. Bank because of your support for the DAPL pipeline.
Saying keep it in the ground.
Water is life!
Protect it!
Water is life!
Protect it!
Water is life!
Protect it!
A Mississippi Stand funeral procession ended at the DAPL toxic sludge dump site in Iowa, where Gold Star mother Neetha Morgan and Dan Truesdale of the Possibility Alliance locked down and blocked access to the site. Without the ability to offload the toxic sludge, DAPL cannot continue to drill underneath the Mississippi River.
We've been warned officially that we are not allowed to step on easements any further in Calhoun County or we will be arrested. So our friend and fellow water protector in here,
What's that?
Cindy Coppola.
Hey, you're fuck. Hey. Forgive them, they know not what they do.
So the takeaway is that the people of Iowa need to rise up, need to organize.
Delay, but what we are really fighting for is for a decolonization of an understanding of how we deal with land in the first place.
Press conference, it was fine, and all of a sudden when we're holding a press conference with a small group of people, all of a sudden we are in violation of some.
So we started doing arrestable nonviolent direct actions. And I got arrested twice, once trying to protect the Des Moines River, Boone, Iowa, and once down along the Mississippi River where people had gathered for a camp called Mississippi Stand.
Our story is just one ember out of the sacred fire that was lit at Standing Rock. I carry my fire wherever I go now.
The land seized through eminent domain abuse throughout Iowa for this pipeline was already stolen from indigenous peoples who have long been in battle with colonial capitalism. Thousands of Iowans stood with the ancestors to resist this continued exploitation, despite what the state did to deter our efforts. And this resistance, built on love and solidarity, won't back down. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed watching that little montage of that's just like a handful of things that happened here, to be honest. There was no way we could, cover the many other actions and events and organizing that went on here in Iowa since 2014. And actually, it's my time to talk a little bit. I wanted to talk about Little Creek Camp because that's something else that happened here. That was an Indigenous-led resistance camp to the Dakota Access Pipeline that Great Plains Action Society founded in. It was like we lit our fire in February, 25th, I believe, 2017, and that was just as the camps were being raided at Standing Rock. And that was not necessarily on purpose that we had planned that, but somehow it was just the right timing. And a lot of folks from Standing Rock came down to continue to fight here in Iowa because we still had a very slim chance of having them reroute and continuing to fight the IUB and give public comment there in order to stop the pipeline here. There are still issues with the pipeline here, and we will continue to fight that. But what Little Creek Camp was, in my opinion, it was really important as well because we must remember that, just like we said in the video, we were talking about the abuse of eminent domain in Iowa, but we can't talk about that without talking about the history of this land and what lies beneath a property deed, which is like an entire history, culture, and the peoples, that inhabited this space and took care of it in a better way than what's being done now. And so, I think that it was really important to bring that Indigenous perspective to Iowa in order to continue to fight this pipeline here, especially since what was happening at Standing Rock was a huge Indigenous-led movement that went throughout the world. And Little Creek Camp ran until August, the end of August, about 6 months, and we did a lot of good things. And we got goats and chickens and compostable toilets and gardens, and so it was really cool in that perspective as well. And we did have some issues. We did have infiltrators there. There's actually a few articles, I think, on The Intercept about the infiltration that occurred at our camp, and Tiger Swan apparently renting a house next to our camp and watching us and getting in there and causing trouble. And so, but the good thing is that, we got through it and we continue to do what we needed to do. And here we are now with a much larger community working in solidarity together to continue to fight, environmental degradation and the climate crisis and social injustice, which all go together. Like Mark said, that this is the most biologically colonized state in the country. And that's so sad because this land lies between Iowa's borders are actually the Missouri and the Mississippi River. How sad is that? That the most beautiful land lying between these two magnificent rivers is just so polluted. I think it was 2017, 750 waterways did not meet the Clean Water Act standard. And they're continuously closing about 70% of the beaches throughout the year because people can't swim in them because they're so polluted and people are getting sick. The amount of land here that animals have to actually move around is limited. And so wildlife is not doing well here either. And I think this is really important to make this connection, because then now we're putting a pipeline through it, which is always going to be a disaster no matter what, regardless of whether it leaks or if it causes massive emissions later. And it's an issue because right now Iowa is the #1 contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And here we are putting this lethal substance through every single waterway in the state. And then under the Mississippi River. And so I just think that, it's really important that we continue to speak about this, regardless of whether or not it's in the ground. It's just a pipe, it's just a pipe. It's not impossible that we could stop it still. So that's the way I look at it. And I would like to welcome our next guest, who is Keith Putney, and who has been doing tremendous work for years as well to stop this pipeline. And Keith, you are a landowner, and so we thought it was really important to have that perspective here in this talk.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I've been sitting through the whole presentation. It's been interesting and fun to a lot of the people that I've networked with since about 2015 when Wally Taylor, am I still there?
You are.
Am I still there?
Yeah.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah, you're here.
Wally Taylor was the attorney who actually took Puntany versus the Iowa Utility Board, which was the landowner case, to the Iowa Supreme Court. And one of the things that the landowners are continuing have to deal with is the after effects of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I'm watching your interpreter, so I'm trying to slow down a little bit. I presented to you a video that's up on YouTube called Betrayed that I would recommend anybody who wants to know about the plight of the Iowa landowners I've given you the site to that, and you can pass that out. There's about 12 or 14 of us that got together and actually produced that video, and it's quite interesting.
I'll put the link in the chat.
And then I also gave you a bunch of other cases that, including the one that we took to the Iowa Supreme Court. We tried to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court, but unfortunately, all of the stuff around the Trump presidency limited what the U.S. Supreme Court would take. But fortunately, there was another case that got there, which is Knicks, K-N-I-C-K v. Township of Scott. I also gave you that site. I would recommend people look at that as well. And that case really has opened a door that wasn't available before to landowners. And that deals with the U.S. Constitution, Fifth Amendment, and whether or not the state laws on the state constitutions and the Administrative Procedure Act, which is the administrative laws under which the Iowa Utility Board operate, provide due process for landowners as to the taking under eminent domain. And that case actually said that in the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion, it didn't adequately provide the ability for landowners to address the issues. And so it opened a door from state courts into federal courts. And I think we're going to begin to see those kinds of issues on the eminent domain in the future. So my message to you is one of hope. I think we're making progress, but it's slow progress. We also have another case called the Roger Timison case, the Alliance Pipeline. That one was about the damage to the soils in Iowa from pipelines and whether that damage can be continuous or just for a short period of time. And it's clear that the Iowa Court of Appeals said it can be continuous, and it raises a burden of proof that the landowners have to meet. But with modern farm agriculture out there with yield maps on combines and everything else, we have the ability to address those and to seek redress. Unfortunately, what all of this indicates is there's a substantial economic burden on the landowners to go forward in each of these actions. And when you only have 2 acres or 5 acres or 10 acres involved, that's a huge burden because Dakota Access or DAPL have unlimited funds to go ahead and fight against each of us individually. As to the fate of DAPL, we'll know more in about a few days. On the 9th, the Corps of Engineers and the Biden administration have to address the concerns of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals relative to Lake Olathe, which is what was talked about earlier. The permit for Dakota Access is vacated. There is no longer a permit that's for them to operate under the original terms, which was 570,000 barrels, or under the new proposed 1,100,000 barrels. And so that court hearing on the 9th will give us an indication whether or not DAPL is going to be shut down, pending the environmental impact statement that has now been ordered by the district court and now also by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So I think there's hope out there. I also will tell you that those of us who are farmers and trying to pick up the pieces from the construction side of this are going forward now. It's been 3 years. The land is settled out around the pipe. We're now finding what the real damages is to the soil and the right-of-way that's there. And under the Iowa Code, we can again begin to address some of those concerns with Dakota Access. But again, that involves a lot of time and a lot of money, and maybe another lawsuit going forward to try and redress those rights as well. I currently have a number of I will say outreach actions going forward. I have a property tax appeal pending at the Iowa Revenue Department for the damage done to my soil on the right-of-way. I'm dealing with Iowa State University and USDA, who actually determined what's called CSR, corn suitability rating, which is how property taxes against farmland are levied to reduce the CSR on my property. And the Iowa State University Soil Tilth Laboratory actually has now a project they're proposing to USDA to go across the entire 346 miles of right-of-way in Iowa and to analyze the soils to see how much damage there is. That's going to be a very large, expensive, and multi-year project, but one very worthwhile if we get that done, because that will lay the groundwork for future lawsuits across the nation against all of the pipelines that have caused this kind of damage. And Timothy did one other thing. Timothy argued that there's a substantial amount of heat that comes off the pipelines into the soils, which dries the soils out and causes, damage to the crops. That's laid the basis for additional complaints against Dakota Access potentially, as they double the flows through the pipeline from 570,000 to 1,000,001. You can imagine that those kinds of additional flows may create some additional heat issues for the crops that are in that right of way or around the pipeline at that point. And finally, I just went through an eminent domain hearing on my piece of ground. We're now appealing that one to the Iowa Supreme Court, now using some of the new law that's out there with some of this case law, Timothy in particular, which argues that soils can be damaged long-term and not just short-term. And we think that the eminent domain statute in Iowa 479B has substantial problems, and maybe based on these cases could be overturned at some future date, or it should be overturned at some future date. Christine, I will also tell you that Ed Fallon has a YouTube up there on the Bakken oil showing that it can be ignited and it's flammable. When I ran for Senate back in 2016, one of my people went up to the Bakken area and got samples. Actually gave some of those samples to the Standing Sioux folks to use for their lawsuit, and we actually had it analyzed at Iowa State University by a chemist up there, and it has substantial NGLs, that's natural gas liquids, all of which are carcinogenic. That's butanes and ethanes and all kinds of things. So if anybody wants that analysis, I have that analysis, and I'd be glad to send it so you guys can take a look of that as well. I think, because my time is shortly going to close here, what I also have done in terms of outreach, I am kind of a focal person because of my experience and background. I've got 40 years in farming. I've got 32 years as an IRS estate and gift tax attorney throughout the whole state, pretty much the western 2/3 of Iowa. John Murray and I founded what was called the PPRC, the Property Rights Coalition, which was the organization that actually took the fight to Dakota Access all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court. And and we're continuing to network with all of the Native Indian organizations, EDF, especially with the folks that are fighting the Standing Sioux case right now, with Soil, which is Save Our Illinois Land, which is fighting the expansion of the pipeline over in Illinois. Earth Justice, as you know, is the primary law firm representing the Standing Sioux against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they've been very, very successful in terms of everything that they've done. But the real interesting thing is, in the last 2 or 3 years, all of these organizations, whether it's Earth Justice or NORD or EDF or Sierra Club or Greenpeace and all the other major organizations, have started interacting in a way where they're supporting each other, and that's really gratifying to see. I met with all of the presidential candidates who came through Iowa for 2020 and spent a lot of time with their staffs talking about not only Dakota Access, but the monocultural farming and the other issues that we've got. So I think with the new Biden administration, with the possibility of some additional taxes like carbon taxes, with the possibility of payments to farmers for greening up their farming and moving away from strictly corn and bean farming, and doing something other than CAFOs for livestock. I really think there's that word hope is out there, and we need to focus on that and continue to organize and share all of our information and work together. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you do and the wealth of knowledge you bring to this, and the fight you put in as a landowner as well. I hope to hear more about what you're doing, and also we're going to possibly have to all get together and talk about this doubling of DAPL, the oil through DAPL. So we'll be talking soon, I'm sure.
Christine, just a point of clarification for you. What DAPL says, and that's been bought off by apparently most everybody who's looked at it, is the doubling of the flow is not going to increase the PSI.
Good.
What they're doing is they're at, right, good or bad.
It's still not good. I mean, I don't.
There was 30 coal-fired plants that with 570, it's going to be 60 with 1,000,001. But what they're doing is they're adding extra pumping stations, because as the oil flows up and downhill, as the pipe goes up and downhill, there's pressure drops and along the lines. And so what the additional pumping stations will do will create a constant 1,440 PSI, as opposed to having this roller coaster of, PSI changes as the oil flows through the pipe. And
thank you for clarifying that.
Supposedly, they're also adding what's called DRA, drag reducing agent. It's supposedly a non-toxic lubricant in the oil flows, and that's to cut down the friction of adding more oils. And because when you add more oils, you got to compress, it with the more to get it through there. And so this DRA is supposed to reduce the friction, which will also help reduce the heat. Again, remember I'm talking about the case out there, which says that anytime you run liquid through a pipe, there's heat generated that radiates out from the pipe. And of course, when you got corner beams and the root structure going down to where the pipe is, that can create some issues in terms of crop yields and everything else. So there's a wealth of information out there. Most of us don't believe half of what Dakota Access says, but we've gone to the point where some of the farmers are actually putting weather stations over top of the pipe and putting a probe down to right on the pipe to measure the heat. And so those are the kinds of things that we can do basically to prove that Dakota Access is wrong, and that it's another part of the indemnification process to make farmers whole, at least as to the crop side of this, if not the soils, in terms of all of that. Love to talk to you more, but we got a limited time.
Yeah, no, I do have a question from the audience, from Faith, actually. She wanted to know what's happening on April 9th, and she wants to know, I know it's to try and shut it down, but where is it, and what parties besides Standing Rock? With this action that you were talking about.
Okay, well, Earth Justice is representing Standing Rock and all the tribes that have done, and actually Sierra Club and EDF and Greenpeace have all joined in the law, that particular part of the lawsuit, to shut Dakota Access down. Okay, the pipeline down, because the permit has been vacated. There is no permit now. Okay, they're operating under a small exception that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has granted them to continue operating.
And this is at Standing Rock. I want to just make that clear.
This is at a Standing Rock, issue, the Lake Olathe type of thing. Shut that down now. That. So the district court, the pipeline be vacated, meaning no more oil in the pipeline. Okay. The 10th Circuit stayed that vacation order pending the opportunity for the Standing Rock folks and the U.S. Army Corps and the Energy Transfer folks to try and work out a deal where the oil could continue to flow safely through the pipe, while the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, which is going to take 13 months, okay, was being prepared. Of course, Standing Rock wanted it shut down, and the Corps was basically leaning under Trump to continue the oil flow, because Energy Transfer Kelly, the Energy Transfer head, when it was a Trump supporter. And so on the 9th, they're all coming into 10th Court of Appeals with basically legal documents, okay, which argue either for or against the continuation of the oil flows. Then the 10th Circuit will issue their final opinion as to whether or not that pipeline should be shut down pending the full EIS, okay, in terms of that. And the Biden administration is also weighing in on that. Under the 10th Circuit's usual process, if your permit is vacated, your right to use the pipeline ends until the conditions are satisfied to start the pipeline back up. In other words, another permit is granted. That is the usual way that the NEPA requirements that out there, the National Environmental Protection Act requirements are kept whole rather than being piecemeal taken apart.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if Dakota Access is going to be allowed to continue to run oil through the pipeline. We know right now that as of the 5th, they're in Iowa upgrading the pumping station with new pumps. We know from Soil, Save Our Illinois Land, they've already started adding new pumping stations, building a new pumping station and working on the existing pumping stations over in Illinois. We also know that the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission over in Illinois, did grant the expansion from 570,000 to 1,000,001 barrels. That's under appeal now from Soil, Save Our Illinois Land, which is farmers and environmentalists like all of us, okay, arguing that should not be approved, and that the whole hearing process was tainted, okay, over there in Illinois. So there are a large number of fights going on at the local level, at the state levels, although Wally has correctly told you there's nothing going on in Iowa right now because the IUB, we approached the IUB and they basically whitewashed everything in terms of that. And then there's the federal lawsuit, which is the Standing Rock lawsuit. And so the 9th, not necessarily right on the 9th, but shortly after that, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals will reach a decision as to whether or not Dakota Access should be shut down pending the full EIS. And the Biden administration may weigh in and say Dakota Access, because it violated NEPA, should not be granted a permit at all, in which case the Dakota Access Pipeline would have to be abandoned. Okay, that raises issues of trust. That raises issues of trespass because they never received a valid permit in the first place. Okay, so this is a very complicated set of legal facts, but the 9th is going to be a critical date. April 9th is going to be a critical date. You'll hear it in the news. Well,
thank you so much for giving us that very important information.
Yeah.
And I think Carolyn has put a link in here too. It was wonderful talking to you, and as always, I learned something, and I hope we can talk more again.
Yeah,
Have a good night.
If people have questions, well, you've got my email. Go ahead and send me an email or whatever.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. That was a lot of info in a short period of time. And that's why I like that this is recorded, because I'm going to go back and watch it myself, even though I'm here. I would like to welcome Adam Mason to the stage. Adam is actually, I don't even know your title at CCI, at Iowa CCI.
I'm the state policy organizing director.
You're kind of like the guy, like you're involved.
No, it's just a fancy word for community organizer.
Right? And so Adam works with Iowa CCI, and they did significant amount of work here in Iowa as well to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I would like to offer you the stage to say some words about what you guys did.
Thank you, Sikowis, and thank you and everyone at Great Plains for bringing this together.
Absolutely.
It's so critical that we continue to celebrate the work we've done and to continue fighting. So, at Iowa CCI, we got involved in the Dakota Access Pipeline fight. And as you mentioned, we were calling it the Bakken Pipeline. I remember the day that the first newspaper story started running across the state and radio stories were starting to play. And at the CCI office, our phone started ringing. We were hearing from landowners who were concerned. We were hearing from water protectors who were concerned about an oil spill. And we were hearing from folks who are concerned about climate change and who want renewable energy, not more fossil fuels for our country. And so we knew at that point that we had to get involved. And thankfully, as the coalition came together, that Carolyn and Mark were talking about, we were all in with the coalition because we know that together we're stronger. We went through the permitting process that the Iowa Utilities Board held. The process that Wally detailed earlier. We followed that process and engaged our folks and members across the state to participate in that process, knowing that all too many times these kinds of processes are rigged against us. Even after that process had run its course, we continued fighting. We took inspiration from what was happening at Standing Rock and knew that at that point we had to stand in solidarity. And so it was in August, after the pipeline permit had been granted here in Iowa, that with members, both CCI members and members of the coalition, we organized a protest at the construction staging grounds in Boone County and engaged in civil disobedience to blockade construction. And on that day in August, 31 people were arrested for blockading construction. We came back a few weeks later to protect the Des Moines River as they were tunneling the pipeline underneath it with a car action where we used our cars to blockade that construction. And we continued to support the organizing that was going on across the state to resist this pipeline. One of the things that that Trisha said and that a number of folks tonight have said is that this fight isn't over. This fight goes on, and that is so true. And one of my fondest memories, actually, of this fight was work that we got to do together with Great Plains and with you, Sikowis, when Wells Fargo, who financed the Dakota Access Pipeline, decided to hold their shareholders meeting in Des Moines, Iowa. And so, together, the art and imagery that Great Plains brought and coming together to make sure that Indigenous leaders and farmers and students and experts from our coalition were present inside that shareholders meeting, speaking out at the same time that hundreds of us rallied outside, crashed the shareholders meeting, and for a while actually took over 2 or 3 of their offices in downtown Des Moines. That just vividly sticks out in my mind and continues to encourage me about why we should continue fighting DAPL and all of these pipelines as they take over our land.
And some of that imagery was in the video that I played earlier. So I think if y'all go back, you can check the video on our Facebook page and you'll see that the Wells Fargo imagery, and that was a very powerful action. And thanks to Iowa CCI.
Well, and thanks to Great Plains Action and to all of our partners that showed up to that day. Some of those messages again so clearly is that Wells Fargo is banking on stolen land. And one of the other issues that we really, I feel like, spotlighted that day is the continued violence against Indigenous women. And so being able to help lift that up, I think was an honor for our organization.
Well, we appreciate everything that you guys do here. And I've really appreciated the growing solidarity that I see happening between Indigenous folks and Iowa CCI. And I hope we can continue to do that, considering what we still have to face here. Because let's be honest, the pipeline is an atrocity, but this land is already at the brink of collapse. I mean, we are so close to I don't even know how Iowa is still functioning. It's a desert. I mean, it really is. And the only way we can seem to grow things here is by pouring more literal shit on top, which is just killing everything else. So, I mean, we have a lot of stuff to do.
That's right. No, everything you laid out earlier about the impact on our waterways, over 750 polluted, impaired waterways, the closed beaches. This is happening because of all of these factory farms, right? And just in the news today, actually, word of a DNR approval of a 10,000 head, over 10,000 cattle feedlot up in northeast Iowa, right next to a beautiful trout stream that fisher folk enjoy and that is one of Iowa's pristine streams. This is the kind of development that we don't need more of. We need to actually go back to our roots and look at the principles of food sovereignty and how we restore more regenerative practices and traditional farming methods that obviously our Indigenous brothers and sisters knew and used to care for the land for hundreds of generations.
Yeah, we do. I'm thinking right now about Lance Foster, one of my mentors, and he's the tribal historian of the Iowa. And, he's taught me so much. And also, even the archaeologists here, I know archaeology, I have an issue with it as being an Indigenous person, but the good thing about what I've learned from them is just about the people that were here and how important it was that we keep, how important it is that we keep doing the things that they were doing, because what colonial farming practices aren't working out for us, and so we need to do what Indigenous people were doing beforehand. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope
thank you, Chris Sikowis. Thank you.
All right, bye. Man, I'm just having such a great night because I was kind of worried because I'm working all the tech by myself tonight and I'm introducing everybody and I'm texting people in the background, but I don't even care because all of my favorite people are here. So I'm really excited to introduce our next guest, Miriam Kashia, who is an elder that has one of the 100 Grannies and other organizations and has been doing so much for years. And it's an honor. So hello, Miriam.
Hi, Sikowis. I think that's the first time I've ever called you that. I'm delighted to know your quote, real name.
Yes. Please tell us about the 100 Grannies and getting arrested and everything that you guys did here to fight the pipeline in Iowa.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's an honor, a true honor to be with all these folks who know so much. I started out thinking I needed to talk about a plan to bring us up to date about the status of DAPL and Line 3 and KXL and all the harm and potential destruction they threaten. And I decided, no, other people on this call know far more about that than I do, and you do probably too. So I decided instead, I'm going to share with you some stories.
I want to just make a quick point, Miriam. When you move, you're scratching your mic, so we get interference. So just be careful.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that.
I just want to make sure we can hear you. That's all. It's important.
Yeah. Okay. Instead, I'm going to share some stories with you about my experiences standing alongside my Indigenous, First Nations, Native American friends and allies in the shared battle to protect treaty rights, water, sacred spaces, and the planet for us all. So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Thank you.
So here are my stories. First one, venturing forth outside my comfort zone in 2013. I'd been following, peripherally involved in environmental work for many years, even attending some local protests and joining several activist groups. The first time I ventured out to stop a pipeline was to Nebraska in 2013 to the site where they were building an energy barn directly across the path of the proposed route of the KXL pipeline. That journey taught me about pipeline threats and ignited me. Move forward a year to the Great March for Climate Action, when I walked every step for 3,000 miles across the United States, from LA to DC, with the Great March for Climate Action for 8 months. We walked past the huge fossil fuel-driven power plants, saw the decimated communities and sacrifice zones, and the polluted waterways. We wanted to raise the alarm about the impending climate catastrophe and spoke to thousands of people en route. On that remarkable journey, some of the most hospitable and supportive people we met were the Navajo and Pueblo people, who told us about their polluted and disappearing waterways due to increasing drought and from uranium mines many years before. They face ongoing health crises as a result, and they knew our mission was their mission. Move forward to 2015. An activist marcher friend of mine from the San Juan Islands in the Pacific Northwest invited several of the elder women from the Climate March to go with her to stand with the Unistoten Action Camp in northern British Columbia. These courageous and determined people were leaving their homes in nearby towns to re-inhabit their sovereign territory against Enbridge's threat of a pipeline
across their unceded lands. We spent a week there, learning about their culture, their history, intergenerational trauma, and we supported their movement. Even though the Canadian Supreme Court upheld their rights to their unceded land, the battle continues to this day, with consistently increasing threats and incursions into their sovereign lands. They told us when we were there and since that our white folks' presence with them made them safer from the Canadian Royal Mounted Police incursions into their territory. So move forward to 2016. By this time, I considered myself to be a climate action warrior with a strong focus on stopping pipelines. One of my mottos is, do what's in front of me. And the DAPL pipeline that originated in northwest North Dakota at fracking sites was moving toward Iowa. So I went to North Dakota. The first time I went in the spring of 2016 was to attend the only hearing the Army Corps of Engineers allowed the Lakota tribes. I listened in that place for just the 2 hours allotted as grandmothers, chieftains, indigenous scientists, and many, many others made their case, protecting their homeland, their sacred sites, and the source of their water. In the end, the head of the Army Corps of Engineers who ran the meeting replied with a heartless sentence: "We will do our job." And as you know, they approved the pipeline without an adequate environmental impact statement. At the end of the hearing, I drove to an encampment called the Sacred Stone Camp that I heard about from the folks at the hearing. There were a half a dozen tents, a lean-to for a kitchen, one teepee, and about a dozen people, but they were clearly in it for the long haul. On my second trip to Standing Rock, a few months later, I was greeted by beautiful flags lining the roadway into camp. They represented 150 national tribal groups, and there were many flags from around the world, many other flags from around the world. I met people who had come to support Standing Rock from Norway, Nigeria, and South America. I was very glad to see an Iowa flag flying among them. Supplies, support, and people were flowing in from everywhere. By then, Standing Rock, as it was now called, named after the local Lakota tribe, was a bustling town of 10,000 people, the second biggest city in North Dakota. It was a stunning cultural renaissance for the Native people that I felt honored to witness. During my week there, I observed amazing organization, cooperation, and community. I wanted to find a way to be useful, so I spent 2 days in a training for the mental health first aid teepee, which was led by a professional Lakota woman. It was intended to help address the large numbers of cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that were emerging due to the violence people were facing when they made attempts to peaceably block the construction of the pipeline. It was clear that old trauma, some of it intergenerational, was being triggered, and I wanted to help. One incident I recall working at the mental health first aid teepee stands out. A young Native man who was clearly very traumatized, who had been at the front lines of the violence, was brought to the teepee by his friends. He was combatant and hostile towards us, and possibly even psychotic. One woman who had been working at the mental health first aid teepee for a long time sent him to see an indigenous healer that she knew of, who was also helping those who were traumatized. That young man came back to us a couple of hours later with a smile, a handshake, an apology, and a thank you. It was hard to believe the transformation. It was such a clear example of how one's own cultural traditions and practices are so important. My third visit to Standing Rock was on November 8th of 2016. How could I ever forget that date? I woke up and crawled out of my tent the morning after the election, not knowing who had won. After walking up to Media Hill, where folks went to use their phones, I spotted a friend. From the look on her face, I knew Trump had been elected, and I fell into her arms, sobbing. She took me by the hand and led me to the sacred fire that had formed around as a place for meeting and drumming. Someone from the mental health first aid teepee came over to stand by me. And when she noted my distress, she said this to me. I spoke with one of the elders a few minutes ago, and I want you to know what he said. And I quote, "Today we will drum and dance and we will sing. We will not fear, because it is fear that feeds the darkness. And even now I get teary as I remember the calmness this wisdom brought to me, and I have called upon it many times." Move forward a year to Mississippi Stand in 2017. You cannot call yourself a climate action warrior without some hard proof. By the way, warrior in the Lakota language means defender, protector. Back in Iowa, I was working hard to prevent the DAPL from taking land from farmers from eminent domain and threatening our waterways across the state. I testified at the Iowa Utility Board hearings with other members of the 100 Grannies before they granted the permit. A large coalition of groups, we called ourselves the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition, put together flotillas and sit-ins and media events, a street theater drama, banner drops, etc., etc., etc. After participating in dozens of these events, it became clear that we needed to up the ante. So about 30 of us were arrested near Boone, that Adam referred to a few minutes ago, for blocking the drilling equipment going under the Des Moines River. And then hundreds of folks from tribal groups, out-of-state people, and activists from who knows where showed up at an encampment at a spot next to the river we called Mississippi Stand to prevent drilling under the mighty Miss. We finally stormed the fences to stop the drill, and another 30 of us were arrested. 4 other grannies and I pled not guilty and prepared for our trial only to have our disappointment because the case was dismissed when we were on our way to the pretrial hearing and it was canceled. In 2017, the DAPL was completed, and since then, the flow of toxic crude has moved millions of gallons from North Dakota to Illinois for eventual shipment to the Gulf for export on the global market. Profit, not planet, not people, not rights, but profit. The flow was recently doubled. One of my mottos is, you don't lose until you quit. This is one of the most important lessons I have learned, and my Indigenous friends and allies have been exemplary in that regard. I'll end with this. Ever forward, together, for a just, equitable, compassionate, and sustainable earth for all life. Thank you.
I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we need a moment of silence. I feel like we Thank you. Hi, Kitatamahin. How we say in my language. I love you a lot, Miriam. I will be calling you soon because we all need to catch up. I think we have things to do. Yeah. I'm going to get to our next guest because she's also been doing a lot of work here for ages in the state. And I want to say goodnight to Miriam, and I love you a lot. I'll talk to you soon. Our next guest, Sarah Young Bear Brown, is phenomenal in my opinion, and has been doing work here to stop the pipeline for many years as well. And I was really lucky because the first time I met you, Sarah, was at the library in Iowa City, and you taught me the sign, which yes, thank you. I always seem to get it wrong. And that was very meaningful to me. And so since that time, I'm always very, it's always a big treat to have you with us and to hear your perspective on everything, because you did some unique work, and I'm hoping you can tell us about that.
Okay, I can see you. I want to thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm very honored to be here with all of you. What I want to share with you about is, well, first I want to start with my native name. It basically, it means, one second. Woman stands near the river's edge is how it translates, because I'm a part of the fish clan. And I thought, you know, with everything, the water protector, it really fits in with my identity of who I am as well. In 2016, when I had learned about DAPL, that was the first I'd heard about it. And I wanted to know more at that point, so I started doing some research and gathering that information for myself. And I felt that, you know, that was something that we needed to share with our deaf community as well. And so I started making vlogs, video blogs. I started posting to educate the deaf community about DAPL and what was happening in the world. And then also, you know, we tried to share that through deaf news throughout the deaf community as well, because the deaf folks need to know what's happening and what's important in the world. They want to know about environment and climate change and all of that. In November 2016, since Thanksgiving, you know, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. You know, that is something that we reject as a people. But what we decided to do was to set up a gathering of deaf people. We provided interpreters as well, but we decided to go together to North Dakota to be there in solidarity at the Standing Rock Reservation. There were about 50 of us represented from all different states. We had 3 or 4 volunteer interpreters that were able to travel with us so that we had communication access. It was a very rich experience overall. And I just remember how powerful it was when we first arrived at the Standing Rock camp, you know, driving through and seeing all of the tents. It was just packed, and it just blew me away. It was so awe-inspiring. I had never seen anything like that in my life. And it was a shock to my system, but to see so many of us working together and allying together, you know, groups that had historically warred, you know, and battled throughout the centuries. And here we are, you know, and working together, coming from all over. And to see that partnership and to become one big family. It was such a feeling of unity. And water, of course, being the most precious thing that we have, water being life. It was just, I don't know that I would not want to have that happen again, but well, it was just really cool. And I was able to bring my baby girl with me. She was maybe 5 months old at the time. Her native name actually means water woman. And so for her to come with me to Standing Rock was fitting. But anyway, we've been involved in a lot of actions since then, supporting the deaf community, the indigenous communities, just being involved in everything that I can, educating, making sure that people are aware of environmental, crises that are happening in our climate crises. I was invited to go along with the youth of Standing Rock to Washington, D.C. We were there with Line 3 from Minnesota. We were there with Cheyenne River. All of the tribes there or in our group were represented. And we went recently this past week to Washington, D.C. To do some direct actions. And it was just a wonderful experience. But I was able to teach all of them some signs. The signs I taught them were this is water is life, the black snake, let's kill the black snake. And then, it was just really great to have a group of young people and everyone so excited. It was very inspiring. I was really happy to see so many of them signing. It was a real blessing. And then we were able to receive a blessing for our work there. It was really exciting. And we had ASL interpreters there. We had some folks from a Black Lives Matter movement represent. We were looking for interpreters for our event. And so the BLM folks were able to help us with that as well as allies. Everything worked out beautifully. It was just absolutely gorgeous. It really enjoyed working together with the BLM allies, and to work together as in solidarity and as allies is just fantastic. But we did have a chance to talk about stopping the pipelines. And we are asking President Biden to listen to us in our efforts to stop these pipelines. We're wanting to focus on climate change. We have to protect the earth and the environment. Oh, one sec. And since we had been abusing Mother Earth for so long, and Mother Earth has been in pain for so long, our trees are dying and our water is going away, becoming poisoned, and it's dirty and just it's becoming like sludge. And the winters on Earth are becoming warmer, which also decreases the amount of water that we have due to global warming. And an example that I tried to apply here is like a road. I look at it as like a road. One moment. We're having some tech issues. Yes, better. Thank you. So, road. So if you could imagine the hurt, if you imagine Mother Earth as a human, if you could, you imagine putting all of these things into a human's body. You imagine tattooing a human with all of these marks on her surface and the pain that causes. And pipelines, it's like putting an IV in an arm. And so I think of that. I think of Mother Earth being violated and being invaded in that way and poisoned. But for these fossil fuels to be used and to be running out, I mean, by 2060, they're saying we have to find a better way. We have to be better caretakers of our planet, of our mother. And Indigenous people have been fighting from our tribal nations for water protection, but fighting for everyone, not just for Indigenous people, but for all of people, for all of mankind around the world. And it's time for us to fight harder. We have to get more people. We have to get people's awareness. We have to get their attention. And there is a fear. There's a fear that the government, that the oil companies, that we want to create a fear in them. We want them to understand how rich the land is and how it could be. I mean, when they see Iowa, when they see Wyoming, when they see Montana, you look at all of these oil refineries and places that they're setting up, these different fossil fuel refining plants, and you see that the fuels they have to be abandoned over time as they run out of the fossil fuels that they're trying to get out of the ground. I don't want to see that happen to Iowa. We have to fight harder. We have to get people to attend to us. That behavior ruins our earth. We have to get people to work together to protect our mother. And we need farmers to work with us. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you. That was very powerful. I really appreciate everything you've been doing and what you are continuing to do. And I know you were just in DC, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you. And I love all of you.
You too. Our next guest has been fighting pipelines for a very long time, starting with the KXL and then went to DAPL and did a lot here in Iowa. His name is Mahmud Fitil, and he needs some light. Oh, that's better. And he was arrested quite a few times here in Iowa. So I'm just going to let you take it away, Mahmud.
Hey, how are you guys today? Yeah, so during my college time, I went to school in Nebraska, in Omaha there. And there is a connection definitely with DAPL, but I started my fight there with KXL. We fought that for about, I would say, a little over a decade now. And we were coming off of that as kind of a victory. You know, they canceled the permits against KXL and went to school with a bunch of natives, you know. I myself am Indigenous, I'm Crimean Tatar, and got to know our stories as, you know, one and the same. You know, we were subject to colonization by Russians and had our land taken as a land-based people. And very similar stories with a lot of Indigenous folks here, you know, I come to find. So solidarity there with them, heard about what was going on with DAPL up at Standing Rock and so on. And I realized right across the Missouri River there, people here in Iowa were fighting. So I came over, across the river, and joined the fight. I was joined up with ICCI and a number of their actions. We were out there at the equipment yard across from the Iowa Fair, I believe it was at one point. Took a few arrests, you know, 3 or 4 or so, and raised some hell in a good way all across the state. Eventually, we did go to IUB meetings over there, gave written comment, gave public comment as well. Turned to direct action, started engaging in civil disobedience. Omaha is unique because we had the Army Corps of Engineers building there where they were approving these permits. So we held a number of rallies outside there and actually greeted the Standing Rock youth when they ran down from Standing Rock. Continued our work, participating with the resistance throughout Iowa, made a lot of long-lasting relationships and fostered those relationships. Participated in the bank divestment actions along with Sikowis, Adam, and many others. Went up there to Sioux City a number of times with Frank Lemire and his relatives, Menape and so on. Tried to raise awareness. Michelle Free, a couple others were up there. Wally, Trisha.
I said, guess what? Mahmud's computer just died, but this is one of those lucky moments where the guest is actually visiting me, so he can just sit right here.
Right. So sorry about that. Anyway, we'll pick up where we left off. We're up there. Got to know a number of the relatives participating in those actions, and we went ahead and started raising donations. We did a number of drives. We got propane, firewood chopped, and things like that. Started caravanning up to Standing Rock and taking the supplies to the relatives up there. Got to meet Flores, who was part of Be About It camp. Was up there installing solar panels along the Cannonball, and had the unfortunate interactions with Mandan County, Morton County, and so on. Got to learn about what real winter's like up there in the frozen tundra during those blizzards. Can't say I was a fan, but you know, we experienced it and got through it together, like so many other things at camp. So it's definitely more than you know, just a pipeline fight. It was definitely a unique experience that changed many of our lives, as you could tell through our interactions here today. And it's really formed many relationships that have lasted a lifetime, you know. It's something that, you know, really was a pleasure to participate in. It was a bad event, but it brought out some of the best of humanity, as Mark Edwards and many others have talked about earlier. You know, as an Indigenous person from somewhere else, I had come here and found a lot of commonality. You know, a lot of times you don't fit in necessarily in America, being an immigrant or somebody who's different, especially here in the Midwest. But it was a unique opportunity because we all stood for clean water. We all stood for the future generations, and we all found that commonality, and we stood as one against the moneyed interest, against the powerful, against the people who oftentimes don't necessarily think about these things that we all must have in order to survive and thrive. And that's you know, in a nutshell, our involvement. And hopefully we'll continue. You know, we had a scare there. We had KXL brought back and we beat it back again. Hopefully here we'll get DAPL decommissioned and shut down. And we're going to lend our support to our relatives up there in line 3, get that shut down as well. That's about it for me this evening. Sorry about that computer shutting down on you, but we got it taken care of. Take care, everyone.
Oh, this is funny. Okay, so thank you so much, Mahmud. I can't say thank you on the screen, but I'm saying thank you right now to this person beside me. And we really appreciate everything you did, because you got arrested 4 times, right? Yeah, 4 times. I mean, I think there was like 400 arrests in the state, more than people protesting Vietnam, apparently, in the state of Iowa, specifically. So it was a really huge thing here. And, you know, I want to say a quick shout out to people like Jonas Magram here, and Esther Tweedy, and Brenda Brink, and Angie Carter. Like, these are all people that I also would love to have here, to be honest, but like we're already over time. And I'm just like, I thought of all these people. I just want you to know I see you out there, and we see you, and we're going to have to do something more again to bring this group back together. Our next guest is Anna Kruzik. And I wanted both you and Angie to be on here. And I'm so happy that you are, because I was hoping you could give us the overview of like the very beginning of this, like how this even started to be a big deal in Iowa.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, Sikowis, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here and honored to hear from everyone. Such powerful stories. I'm also honored to match Miriam today. We're both wearing our Stop the Pipeline shirts. I don't know if you all can see them from circa 2014. But my name's Anna Kruzik. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently the communications director at Pesticide Action Network. I'm also on the board of the Women Food and Ag Network, which is one of the co-founding organizations of the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition. I'm currently based out of Oakland, California, though I'm from Albia, Iowa, which is in Monroe County near the southern border of the state. I moved to California in the spring of 2016 for a job. And at that time, the pipeline didn't have oil running through it. And like now, the fight was ongoing. It was a tough decision to leave for sure. I was among the co-founding members of the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition, of which you've heard from many of them today. I really just want to say that I owe the coalition and our work together for my love for Iowa and my recognition of home as the place that really radicalized me, that raised me, and that taught me that we all have a shared interest in dismantling exploitative economies and social relations, as well as settler colonialism and white supremacy. I think for a long time, I distanced myself from rurality because I didn't see my values reflected in the dominant discourses that described rural places in Iowa and describing home. But through our work with the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition, which I'll share a little bit about that historical overview, as Sikowis mentions, I learned that I was wrong because not that we don't have challenges and not that we don't have issues to address, but a lot of the time the stories describing our communities don't include stories that we wrote ourselves. So I'm so glad to see so many of the co-founding members on this panel this evening, in the chat, so many folks who were working hard to do this work that I hadn't met before, did this work after I left Iowa. Again, so honored to match Miriam tonight in our Stop the Pipeline shirts, and glad to be with you all this evening and to learn from you all. So just take a minute to picture this. It was the summer of 2014, which I am astounded was 7 years ago now, almost 7 years ago now, but that's when we first began organizing together to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. As many have mentioned, at that time we were calling it the Bakken Pipeline. The pipeline and its resistance wasn't yet on the national radar. The camps at Standing Rock, I think, if I remember correctly, didn't begin for another 18 months, about a year and a half later. So Iowans and folks, of course, in other places as well, but in Iowa, that was around the time that we started organizing together. In particular, to be sure that the Iowa Utilities Board, which was then the permitting body for the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline, could hear from us loud and clear that we are united in opposition to the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline. And when I say we, that we was really broad, and that was part of, I think, what was so powerful about our coalition and about our movement was that, I mean, Iowans from all walks of life. We had urban and rural folks working together, farmers working together, environmentalists working together, settler descendants and indigenous folks working together. Many of us ultimately began organizing under what later became the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition. And this coalition was dozens of community organizations and some community level, some statewide organizations that were united. In general, our mission was to stop construction of the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline, though we began working together on broader issues and talking about broader discourses of justice as well. So as I mentioned, we began organizing in the summer of 2014. The coalition was publicly formalized in February of 2015. And that was done at a press conference, if I remember correctly, in Des Moines. And so the coalition was governed by a steering committee. Many of those folks have been on this call this evening. And later, all members who joined the coalition signed on to a guiding document. And this guiding document lifted up principles of non-hierarchical and justice-centered, as well as ecofeminist organizing principles. So at this point, I know it's been mentioned a few times throughout the evening, you might be wondering why we named ourselves the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition. This was actually a conscious decision that we made because we felt the name, the Dakota Access Pipeline, this was the name that the company had given the pipeline, right? There wasn't a broader sort of media or movement discourse that existed yet at that time. And we felt like it was really important to frame this fight on our own terms and to frame the narrative on our own terms. So we wanted to name the region that the oil was being extracted from and name the land that was being harmed. And rather than in the positive terms of Dakota access, to access something seems like it might be a positive thing, right? So we named it the Bakken Pipeline to really name the Bakken region of North Dakota from which the oil and the land was being extracted from. And so what might be called our first event together as a coalition or one of them, this was before we were formally a coalition, but I do like to share this story. After we heard of the pipeline, there was a group of students with the graduate program in sustainable agriculture at Iowa State University. There were also many other organizational and community members that were involved in the planning of this event. But when we heard about the pipeline, we decided to host an informational meeting in Ames, just a community event to come together to share analysis, both legal, scientific, community-based, justice-oriented, to try to understand what it was that was happening, what was coming. And this was also done in advance of the meetings that were required by the Iowa Utilities Board in all 18 counties through which the pipeline would ultimately cross. So we wanted to get this information out there before those events were happening. We expected, you know, in my opinion, I don't know that we ever explicitly talked about this, but I expected maybe 30 people would show up and that we'd probably know them from all of our other community or advocacy events. All of a sudden there were 300-ish. Definitely a few hundred, and they had come from all across the state. Our reasons for attending this event were different. How we were affected was different. Some of us weren't affected directly, some of us were affected directly, but we were all there. And we realized in that moment, or that's certainly when I realized in that moment, that this fight was bigger than a single pipeline. It was about justice, it was about future generations, it was about building an Iowa that worked for all of us, and that we were going to do that together. And we hosted our community meeting, that one in Ames, in advance of those informational meetings I mentioned. And so some of our first actions together were actually organized opposition at those required by law community meetings. I remember in the days following the Ames community meetings, huddling with a group of people around my friend and colleague Angie Carter's table with a crew of us. Some of you on this call were probably at that table, realizing that we actually had to build the plane while it was in the air, so to speak, that we were building a website, a database, setting up Google groups and listservs, and trying to build the infrastructure that we needed to support all the people that wanted to be engaged in this fight and that wanted to organize together. And we did it, and we did it fast. I don't claim that we always did it well or that we did it right. But we brought together as a collective movements that didn't often work together and figured out how to stand up to protect the commons in a state, specifically our state, Iowa, that was initially created by white settlers' quest for private property on stolen land, where the agricultural economy was then and is now based on extracting and mining soil. So the Dakota Access Pipeline was really an extension of this hegemonic power in the state. We recognized it as a threat. We came together to work and interrogate the assumptions characterizing our movements in our state, and to really stand up for a brighter future. And so that was really powerful. I think I've heard a lot of folks say how the relationships and the power in that movement building was so critical, and it changed my life as well. And so I guess I will end by saying, as you all know, oil started flowing in the Dakota Access Pipeline in June of 2017, but I'm so excited that the resistance continued. Stand in solidarity with the Standing Rock Nation and the youth runners and all of the other folks who are still fighting it, so thank you. And huge thanks to all of those who continue the fight. And I would just say the chant that many of us have said time and time again, no more pipelines, no more oil, keep your carbon in the soil. So thank you.
Thank you. If it wasn't for the work that you did, I don't know, who knows what would have happened here, you know? So thank you so much. I really appreciate it all. And we, have continued to work together since then and built great relationships. And I'm really grateful for that. Yes, and I hope you have a good evening. Good night. And our last guest is Keely Driscoll, actually who works with Great Plains Action Society, one of our youth organizers, actually. And you've probably seen her on our other streams. And I wanted to save her for last because she was just in DC with the youth from Standing Rock and Cheyenne River to demand that Biden also shut down Line 3 and KXL. And so, Keely, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you so much to everyone who's offered up their knowledge tonight to help bring awareness to this movement and keep it going, because we're at such a pivotal point in it. And so I want to thank my mentors, my mother, of course, Sikowis, Donnielle, Sarah, and so many other strong women from my community. Jogimoakwa netishis, Keely Driscoll netishis, Mukamani Swan, Anemeshkwaki Nemowewis. My name is Jogimoakwa, Little Wolf Woman. My English name is Keely Driscoll. I'm 20 years old. I'm from the Meskwaki Nation with ties to the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. And I'm attending the University of Iowa in my 3rd year. And I'm also working at the College of Public Health here in the Native Center for Behavioral Health and for Great Plains. And Sikowis and I were just reflecting on this, actually. When I was younger, I never envisioned myself going into this work at all. And then I was in high school and I had heard for a couple years about the Dakota Access Pipeline. But, I was just being a kid. I was being a youth. I was being a high school student, busy trying to be in all the activities that I could. And I took up speech. I wanted to learn how to deliver a message effectively and be able to create a message that really reflected what I was feeling, because as youth growing up in America, it can be hard to find, as Native youth growing up in America, it can be hard to connect with a lot of the popular discord that goes around, right? And so I was searching for a speech, and I found Sikowis's Iowa Women's March 2017 speech. And it was groundbreaking that something like that was so hard to find, that kind of perspective, that kind of outlook on how we must protect our Iowa environment and fight for our clean air, our clean water, and clean land in a space that seeks to destroy that puts these corporate entities above the individual. And so and it's thanks to those people that I've been able to continue this stuff and start with Great Plains Action Society. And I think I have a lot of hope because I think our youth are equipped more than ever. As has been stated many times tonight by so many of our amazing speakers, we have these connections, these alliances, and this work in place because we've been doing this for so long. And so I'm just thankful that, Donnielle a couple weeks ago asked if I wanted to go to DC and go with the Cheyenne River youth and the Standing Rock youth to help them get this message directly to Biden, take it right up to his front door, because, that's what it takes. Our system, the American system, doesn't value the youth perspective. Youth don't really have a say. They can't vote. But thankfully, our communities do value that. And they are setting us up for success for our futures. And that's why they're teaching us how to continue this work, because it's been going on for so long. And being in DC with these amazing youth and their support systems really gave me a lot of hope, because if we have to go back, we're ready. We're ready to keep doing this every single day until they get it, until they understand that they're not the biggest stakeholders. We are, and our future generations are. And so it was very powerful, what those youth did. And I'm so thankful that I was able to support that, and I was able to represent Iowans and the Meskwaki Nation in DC. We had a 2.8 mile run from the Smithsonian of the American Indian to the Army Corps of Engineer, where we delivered petitions. We heard such amazing speeches from our youth, and I know that we're in good hands. Some of these youth have been doing this work since they were 6 years old or even earlier, and they're back again. And so one of the biggest takeaways is we should let our youth be youth. We should let them have a childhood, but instead they're doing this work that should be done by Biden, and that's what we wanted to let him know, that the youth do want this. And I heard from Silas Nealon and Love Hopkins and all of those young voices that were so powerful. And we destroyed the Black Snake right there on the Black Lives Matter Plaza, and did so many actions in DC that I hope can continue to be uplifted, because it takes a lot of effort on behalf of these youth. You know, I was watching, a lot of them had schoolwork, you know, our youth are still in school. And I don't know, just to see the dedication from people so young, it inspired me. And I hope that, you know, I can grow into these roles to support them as well. And I hope that we can all continue to support them, you know, from the Standing Rock Youth Council and all the other supporting organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been working with, how long have we been working together now? About 3 years? Or
I think so.
or something. Yeah. It's been wonderful. Seeing the stuff that Keely's learning and taking with her. It just gives me hope that, you know, there are people that are just going to keep doing the work, you know, like Wilma Mankiller said, be careful where you place your moccasins, because in that ground is our future generation. And so I kind of live by that. Thank you for being with us, Keely. Have a good night.
You too.
I'll talk to you soon. So we are at the end, and we went over time. But I didn't want to interrupt anybody tonight because I feel like everybody here had really powerful things to say, and I wanted to make sure that we got that message out. And I want to make sure that what happened here tonight reminds us that we have to still keep in touch and keep doing this work, you know, because Iowa is at an end stage environment, and we need to stay connected and keep fighting, particularly because of this current administration that's in, you know, power here, like little Trump cronies still, you know, in office, passing ridiculous laws, not giving, you know, a shit about the environment and the climate, and, you know, not really understanding, you know, what happened here, the genocide, the colonization. You know, we need to continue to push in all facets here. You know, geez, there's people that like couldn't be on here tonight too, like Josephine Ironshield and Regina Sosi, who are from Sage Sisters of Solidarity, who also did amazing work here in the state, in the Quad Cities. Geez, I could go on for a while, to be honest. Just so many people. Thank you for being here today. And just a big shout out to every organization that did work here, and the individuals and the landowners. There's a list of all the organizations at the end of that video that we played earlier. You can see it on our Facebook page. You know, like if I start naming them, I'll be here for like an hour. So thank you, everybody. Ai kitata mehin. Thank you in my language, and let's I don't know, stand strong. Good night.